Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever in the world you're joining us, whether you're with us live or watching this later. Welcome to the 8th Oxford University Press History Book Club meeting. My name is Susan Ferber, and I'm one of the history editors at OUP. On behalf of my colleagues, thank you for taking the time to join us today. For those of you who were with us for the previous book club meetings featuring Thomas Holt's The Movement, Kevin Weddle's The Complete Victory, Annalise Heinz's Mahjong, Phoebe Young's Camping Ground, Gordon Campbell's Norse America, Carter Malkasian's The American War in Afghanistan, or Cameron Blevins's Paper Trails, welcome back. If you didn't get to see these live, you can find the recordings for all of them on OUP's YouTube channel. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, here's a little background. Reading and talking about books in a group has a very long tradition. In the late 18th and early 19th century, the first secular American reading circles, or conversations, a precursor to book clubs, were begun. They required little more than a thirst for literature and a desire to discuss it with like-minded individuals, to talk about challenging ideas, to learn together, and hopefully to have some fun along the way. That's the spirit in which this book club was founded. What we lack in the intimacy of being together in person in a small group, I hope we can gain in creating a broad community of readers. This book club will give you the chance to directly interact with the authors, as well as an opportunity to continue the conversation online with others in the book club. Every meeting features 2 OUP authors in conversation, in this case, the writer of a new book with one of our backlist titles. Over time, we aim to share histories from across the globe from a variety of periods of history and many different authorial perspectives. Linus Van Pelt once said, "Charlie Brown, you're the only person I know who can turn a book report into a lifelong commitment." Well, today we have a historian who turned his childhood fascination with peanuts into a long-term intellectual commitment. I promise this is going to be a real treat that should elicit no wails of good grief. It is my pleasure to introduce our book and authors today. Blake Scott Ball is the chair of the History and Political Science Department at Huntingdon College in Montgomery, Alabama, and the author of Charlie Brown's America, The Popular Politics of Peanuts. He is joined in conversation by Philip Nell, University Distinguished Professor and Director of the English Department's Program in Children's Literature at Kansas State University. He is the author and editor of many works on children's books and cartoons, including Was the Cat in the Hat Black? The Hidden Racism of Children's Literature and the Need for Diverse Books, which Oxford published in 2017. Blake and Phil are going to speak for about 35 minutes, and then the floor will be open to all of your questions. You can start putting them in the chat anytime, and my colleague Erin Cox will bring up as many as she can in the second part. You can also go to the hashtag OUP History Book Club at OUP History Twitter feed, and you can comment there. Welcome, Blake and Phil. Thank you for being here. The floor is yours.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Thanks.
So Blake, I, like you did, grew up on Peanuts. It's really some of the first comics that I remember reading. And it's one of the things I think that got me interested in comics in the first place. But how did you get started writing a book about Peanuts? What led you to the project of Charlie Brown's America?
Well, it certainly had its roots in my childhood as well. My grandmother used to save the Sunday funny pages for me. And so when we would go over for afternoon lunch, she'd pull them out. And of course, right there at the top of the page, front page was always Charlie Brown or Snoopy or, whichever of the Peanuts characters that week. And so there was always a fascination that I had with cartooning and comic strips and comic books but sort of fast forward to graduate school, I was a graduate student, finishing a master's degree and sort of scrambling around to find something relevant to dig into. And I'd been looking at some really different things in kind of modern Southern history, and I got a rejection letter on an article I'd submitted for a journal, and I was like, man, this is just not going the way I wanted it to. And so scrambling around, I came across the idea of Charlie Brown, and what if we talked about American history through the eyes of Charlie Brown. And as a desperate graduate student, I thought, dare I try something like this? And
you dare.
the more people I talk to, the more they're like, oh, I love that idea. What are you going to do with that? And I'm like, well, let's figure it out. And so here we are.
That's great. So this began as a dissertation project then?
That's right. Yeah.
Wow.
I the Schultz archive had opened just a few years prior, and I found them online. They're out in Northern California,
Yeah.
and so I took a visit out there over a summer break before I started my PhD, and it was like, okay, show me everything you got. Hopefully there's enough here. And boy, was there's so much incredible stuff out there. So I got to spend a lot of time out there digging through Charles Schultz's old papers and
That's so
fan
cool.
letters, and
That is so cool.
yeah, it was a lot of fun.
I love that kind of archival research where you're just
Mhm.
sifting through the papers and reading somebody else's mail. It feels almost like you shouldn't be allowed, but it's super
Right.
fascinating, right? It really gives you a lot of insight. So yeah.
Yeah, and you get to a point where you feel like you really know this person in a way that people who knew him personally knows him,
Yep.
and yet never got to meet.
Yep.
So
Yeah, I had that same experience in working on a biography of the children's writer Crockett Johnson and the children's writer Ruth Krauss, who are husband and wife. But I think of them as my closest friends who I've never met, because I know them better than anyone living today, but I never met them.
yeah. That's amazing. How did you get into Cat in the Hat? How did that one happen?
Well, as your Charlie Brown project did as well, this began in childhood. The very first book that I read on my own was Dr. Seuss's Green Eggs and Ham. I really remember it very well because it's a book that I learned later only has 50 different words, which is wonderful for teaching a beginning reader. And also wonderful is that it uses rhyme to teach you how the words sound. And so I vividly remember finishing that book and then reading it again, as a 3-year-old. So that's what begins the interest in Dr. Seuss. And then there are a couple of other books with Seuss in the title, or a Seuss character in the title, that precede Was the Cat in the Hat Black. But I didn't feel that I quite got race right in those books. Which was sort of nagging at me about it. And so that's what led to Was the Cat in the Hat Black. And so I'm not misleading anybody. Only the title chapter is actually about Seuss. The subtitle more accurately gives you what the book is about: the hidden racism of children's literature and the need for diverse books. But that's what led me to it. It was kind of a nagging question that I don't feel like I have addressed this well previously. And honestly, it came out of, in some ways, the previous book on Seuss, which was The Annotated Cat Under the Hats of Seuss and His Cats, which was published for the 50th anniversary of The Cat in the Hat in 2007. I was doing an interview on NPR, and the children's book historian Anita Silvey was on there, and she had mentioned to me that one of the inspirations, or the name of the elevator operator who was one of the inspirations for The Cat in the Hat, Annie Williams was her name. But then in this interview, she also mentioned that she was African American. And, Seuss gave the cat, Annie Williams, Sly Smile and White Gloves. And so that really fascinated me. And then I began thinking about connections between the cat and the connections between racialized animals in children's books and racial caricature in children's books. And that's kind of where at least the genesis of the title chapter came from. But yeah, as you did back in childhood, right? That's where these obsessions begin. So, yeah.
Yes, it seems we had our best ideas decades ago, and just been riding off that for a while.
Yeah, we should just walk right off now and bring on some of the young folks. Because I mean,
That's right.
what are these two old guys going to tell you that you don't already know? Yeah,
Uh,
that's cool. You know, and in our prep talk, you raised a really good question, which I'm going to pose to you now because I think it follows perfectly what we're just talking about. I think for a lot of people, it's probably, well, I don't know. I don't know who the audience is here exactly, but we write books about fun stuff. We write books about fun popular culture, right? Um, and you posed this yesterday, and I thought it was really fascinating. But what happens when you make something you personally enjoy an object of study? Does it take the fun out of it? I mean, what was your experience with Charlie Brown? You know, did studying it kind of, I don't know, make it more of a chore, or make it more of a, and every time you see a Peanuts cartoon, you're always thinking about how can I use this, or what was your experience with that?
well, I was always, my roommate in grad school used to make fun of me because we both loved television. We had a whole set of TV shows that we would um, sort of plan our week around.
Hmm.
And we would sit down, we would invite friends, we would watch. And my roommate always wanted to fast forward through the commercials, and I was always the guy saying, "Whoa, hold on, I haven't seen this one." And because I've always watched commercials in a really weird way, which is I watch a commercial and I'm wondering what the creator of the commercial is assuming about me, or assuming about someone watching this TV program.
Yeah,
And so
who's
that's
the
all, I'm
imagined
always kind
audience
of
for
playing
this?
this. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I was always kind of playing that game with myself, even before I started doing this peanut stuff. And so there's always been that kind of analytical part of me. A lot of my classmates, as I started working on this stuff, would give me a lot of just jabs and things. They would stop by the graduate office and say, "Oh, okay, we got somebody working on the Civil War, and here's a scholar of the American Revolution, and oh, Blake's reading the funny pages." And yeah, but there were certainly times that I worried, like almost like. Be careful. Folks say, "Be careful not to meet your heroes." Like, I almost
Mm,
worried, am I going to ruin this thing that I enjoy by really digging into it? And there were times that the work of writing made me go, "Oh, I don't," or the 10,000th time I got some Peanuts theme thing for Christmas while I was in grad school. It became just more reminder that, oh, the work's not done. Um, but um, but I think in a lot of ways, in the end, it's given me a greater appreciation of just what a feat that someone like Charles Schultz was pulling off, doing this every day for 50 years, and finding ways to keep very familiar things fresh and new twist, and trying new
what
ideas, new characters.
what was that line of his? There's a Charles Schultz line about cartooning that, like, cartooning is like doing the same thing, or doing the same thing every day, but making it different, or making it. There's some line he has about, isn't there, about like cartooning, that you have to do the same thing every day and it not be the same. It's more eloquently
Yeah,
expressed than I'm doing it right now.
yeah, yeah. He's got a number of these. It especially, what at one point he was asked why he didn't start shopping a lot of this stuff out in the same way that a lot of his contemporaries would. You sort of you've created a brand and a cast, and then you kind of get a ghost author or someone,
Yeah,
another
well, that's a
cartoonist,
standard
you know
comic
yeah,
strip thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, and I love Schultz's response. It just tells you how much of his heart was in this. He said, that would be like going to the golf course and having somebody else tee up and drive for me. He's
Yeah.
like, what's the fun in that? He loved golf, but he loved, most of all, he loved cartooning. And so just getting to walk through something that I already had an appreciation for as a fan, but to walk through that and see the challenges, the successes and sometimes the missteps
Yeah.
was really fascinating.
Yeah. And in film terms, he's an auteur, right? I mean, that's what Schultz is.
Yeah,
I mean, he's the
yeah,
one who does all of it. But you said missteps there, and that makes me wonder,
mm.
because you said talk about meeting your heroes. I mean, in the process of meeting your hero, I mean, were there moments where you, I don't know, felt a little bit let down or a little bit like, oof, not sure that's part of his legacy that I feel
Yeah,
happy about, or not, or maybe you're like, well, hey, you know what? He's a full and complex human being, and people
yeah,
make mistakes.
yeah. There's so much that I found impressive about him. But there were one of the very first people that I met out in Santa Rosa, California, which is where the archive was or is, and where his studio was for 40 years. Um, he One of the first people I met in town there on one of my research trips said, "Hey, what are you doing here?" I'm working on, I'm working on then a dissertation on Charles Schultz, and I said, "Oh, let me tell you about the time I ran into Charles Schultz one day." And I can't remember the exact specifics of the story, but basically they were a kid and they tried to stop him for an autograph on the sidewalk, and it was basically a get off my lawn kind of moment. He was, I'm busy, don't bother me, kind of thing, which was a little surprising to my perception of who Schultz was. But so there were certainly those moments. I think professionally, probably the in his story, the moment that most surprised me really comes out of kind of the long story of Franklin.
Mm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
and so if you wanted to, we were talking about race earlier.
Sure.
Kind of talk about race and sort of Schultz's success, and then kind of
Yeah.
how it
Yeah. Absolutely.
pans
I
out
mean,
down the road.
yeah, that's a
Um,
great connection, I think, between Schultz and Seuss too.
yeah,
And I mean,
yeah,
what it sounds
yeah.
like, if I'm understanding you correctly and remembering your book correctly, a somewhat mixed record.
Yeah, yeah. One of the earliest ways that Schultz dealt with, um, tried to broach the topic of race. We actually see him doing it in his cartooning through animals,
Mm-hmm.
and bringing up that question through animals, specifically bringing it up through Snoopy,
Mm-hmm.
in the late 40s and during the 1950s. And he has some, as Schultz tended to do, he could be very, he could leave things very ambiguous.
Mm-hmm.
So he would suggest a really hot button question like racial integration, or like in one mid 50s strip, Snoopy has performed a dance for the children
Mm-hmm.
as Schroeder plays the piano, and then afterwards it's lunchtime and Snoopy is sent into the kitchen to eat his lunch. He can't eat with
Huh.
the children.
Yeah.
And Snoopy muses on this. I'm good enough to perform for them, but I'm not good enough to eat with them.
Interesting. Yeah.
And yeah, yeah. But of course, then Schultz sort of steers away from the seriousness of this by then having Snoopy see the assortment of treats that are waiting for him in the kitchen. He says, I'll take the kitchen," basically, um,
Yeah. Interesting.
um,
It's like
which
he
which
had
is
to
an
end it with a
interesting.
joke, so he kind of,
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. Kind of take the pressure off of the tension out of the situation.
Yeah.
Um, Ultimately, what Schultz is most famous for in the question of race, of course, is the introduction of Franklin
Yeah.
in 1968. Um, Historically, that's the Martin Luther King had been assassinated in April that year,
Mm-hmm.
and then Bobby Kennedy, who
Mm-hmm.
was presidential candidate at the time and was a vocal supporter of continued civil rights reforms. He was assassinated that summer, and so Schultz had been engaged in this correspondence with a a mother from Southern California by the name of Harriet Glickman. She had written him. She was writing a number of different artists and TV writers, and trying to. She was concerned about the media that her children were seeing, and she was particularly concerned that there was no diversity. There had been this weird phenomenon in the mid '60s where pop culture creators sort of were realizing that racialized depiction, kind of stereotypical depictions of Black characters, just were insensitive and did not work. They had abandoned those, but there really hadn't been, no one had taken steps out there to replace it with a more accurate or more positive representation. And so Schultz ends up deciding to do this with some reluctance. He was fearful that maybe he wasn't the right person. He maybe wouldn't understand the Black voice of this child, but he does it, and to a lot of fanfare. Ultimately, Franklin integrates the classroom, which caused a big stir down in the South with some newspapers pulling the comic strip. But the sort of the disappointing thing I found over time was that really Franklin was sort of in a catch-22, I think, or Schultz was really with this character, because he wanted to represent Franklin as a sort of standard bearer. He is smart. He is kind. He gets along with everyone. He's good at sports. He's good in the classroom. Kind of all things. And I think it may. Schultz always said, I write my stories from my characters. So I think of a situation, I pick a character, and then the strip kind of writes itself as that character handles that situation. And I think the challenge was that Franklin didn't have any of the character flaws that any of the other characters, all the other characters did. And so Schultz found himself increasingly without ways to use Franklin. And so Franklin, through the 70s and into the 80s, Franklin unfortunately begins disappearing into the background, making fewer and fewer appearances. And the fact that Schultz never expanded to any more named minority characters is disappointing. Yeah. What about you? What's been your experience in dealing with?
Oh, well, I mean, I think the short answer to Seuss and Race is that I think he confuses people, because he does both racist work and anti-racist work, and I think people assume that racism is an either or, that you're like on team racism or you're on team anti-racism. You do, and you laugh, and that suggests you understand why that's kind of an odd way to think about it, because racism infects our minds when we are quite young, and shapes our perceptions when we are quite young, and many who intend to do anti-racist work accidentally replicate it in their own work. Well, myself included, if you look at the earlier works I did on Seuss. So, so Seuss, for example, during World War II, is doing cartoons for the newspaper PM, which was a popular front newspaper out of New York. And he is against Jim Crow. He is against discrimination in hiring practices, and he is not drawing his Black characters as caricatures, but he is drawing as caricatures the Japanese characters. They're, so it's like anti-racist, also critical of anti-Semitism, these cartoons, but also super racist against the Japanese. That's in the 40s, and then in the 50s.
But very acceptable in that cultural moment.
Well, and actually, my question for that is, to whom? That is to say, I can imagine being the object of that caricature and not finding it acceptable, even if there was an enormous amount of anti-Japanese propaganda, and actually using census data to target Japanese people and then round them up and ship them off to camps, right? So absolutely. I mean, you can understand it within the cultural moment, within the historical moment. But I would resist I would sort of resist saying, well, that's just what people were doing,
Sure.
because
Yeah.
people were doing that. There are also people who oppose that, and certainly the targets of it. I'm going to guess we're more on the opposing side than the oh well side. But yeah, so Seuss is complicated that way. And in terms of Seuss and race, there are things to admire him for and things to be actively critical of him for, which is why Dr. Seuss Enterprises pulled 6 Seuss books earlier this year, some with racist caricatures in them, and they just pulled them. They stopped publishing them. And my book played a role in that, and so did a really great article by Katie Ishizuka and Ramon Stevens. Those were sort of that's really what kind of brought this to a larger audience, I think, where those were my book and their article. So yeah, it's complicated because you can admire a person's a person no matter how small. And Horton Hears a Who as kind of a parable of difference. That some arbitrary difference like size shouldn't mean that you're discriminated against. But then you can look at the racist caricature in the African island of Yurka from If I Ran the Zoo, which is published 2 years after Horton, right? So same period, and say, like, what are you thinking? What are you doing here, pal? But that's not the only racist caricature in that book either. So for me, it's mixed. I can see some good intent and some good action, and I can see some ways in which Seuss is not sufficiently reflective on how the culture he grew up in shaped his visual imagination. But I also, I also understand how that happens, right? So I sort of don't want to condemn Seuss, but I also don't want to forgive him. Like I want to understand and say, like, if you want to understand how racism works, this is how it works, right? It's not like you have people in white hoods doing all the bad stuff. No. People who have perfectly positive intent and would be in favor of school integration, for example, are also perpetuating bad ideas. So, but anyway, I'll get off my my soapbox now. You can get on the soapbox or stay off. Up to you.
Well, I think these are excellent points. I think it highlights why it's there's still such an important need for there to be minority creators in pop culture, and not just playing sort of at every stage, but also having sort of production control, right?
Absolutely.
Control over what types of stories and what types of characters and what type, because you're right. There's a subtle insidiousness to the type of story that everyone in the room is laughing at, except the person that is being targeted, and there's a very clear but subtle othering, right? You're not part of the group in this joke.
And to Schultz's credit, right? I mean, wasn't he mentor to Maury Turner, the creator of
Yes,
right? Which is a pioneering comic strip featuring Black children, which seems to seem to have Peanuts as kind of an inspiration for it too.
Yes, so. It did, and that was something. I felt like if folks read Charlie Brown's America and they read this chapter about Franklin, I believe it's called Crosshatch is Beautiful. I sort of take an aside in that chapter to tell the story of Maury Turner, because in part because there really should be a biography out there about this guy and the way that he sort of in a way that Schultz didn't. Took this head on. He had ugly letters and death threats during the mid '60s for his comic strip, and but he was persistent. He also would include sort of all these sort of inset histories of great minority Americans, women, men, Black, Asian, all kinds of different folks. It was just really really pushed this and really believed in it and sort of tirelessly fought that fight for decades. So yeah, I think Schultz saw what was special about Turner, and at every turn, including helping him get into the National Cartoonist Society and things like that. Schultz was a big cheerleader of Maury Turner.
Yeah, and people watching this, listen to what Blake says here. There should be a biography of Maury Turner. I mean, I haven't seen one, so I don't think there is one.
Right.
But that would be a great project. Yeah, maybe there's a graduate student or an assistant professor or an independent scholar out there looking for a project. There's a biography of Jackie Orms, the first, or I understand to be the first African American woman cartoonist that came out a few years ago, and let's have one for Maury Turner. Oh, and speaking of great African American cartoonists, got to drop in here Michael Tisserin's biography of George Harriman, who passed as white, but was in fact, well, in New Orleans, I believe would be called sort of mixed race, but where he was born. But anyway, I'm veering slightly, but honestly, when you say biography of Maury Turner, I'm like, man, I hope somebody watches this and does that project, right? Because wouldn't that be? Yeah, that would just be. As a biographer myself, I find that work fascinating. So I'm just like, someone do this, please. Yeah. That'd be wonderful. Yeah. So we talked about lots of different stuff in our pre-talk, and one that I thought was interesting and could sort of maybe land with our audience as well as us is audience. That we are both allegedly grown men who write about allegedly children's culture, right? Comics, picture books, right? And yeah, how what's your sense of how Schultz thinks of audience, and what's your sense of how audience and how the quite possibly wide range of ages, but also experiences, since this is enormously popular, right? It's not just being read by a certain subset. Everyone reads Peanuts. How might that affect the way we understand it? So kind of two questions, like how does Schultz see audience, but then also, given the vast range of humans who read, know, enjoy, argue with Peanuts, how does that affect the way you write about it, the way we think about it, the way we interpret it?
Well, yeah, when Schultz would be asked about asked this question, and a lot of times it was assumed by interviewers that he was a children's writer, and he does do some really more directed children's type things. I think there are definitely elements of the TV specials that are targeting more towards children.
Or the animated films like Snoopy Come Home, right? I mean, that's a children's film.
Yes. Yep, absolutely. But in his comic strip, he was adamant that I write about characters that are children, but I'm writing for. He saw himself as writing to adults. He's one of the things he was adamant about was that he wanted to keep it, in his words, keep it wholesome, right? And even that has been debated. I see it debated more and more in recent years. Like, oh man, look at all the times that Lucy hauls off and just punches Charlie Brown in the face, or they whack each other with and things like this. And he saw this as sort of wholesome, but there are definitely questions about that. One of the things that I saw as I was trying to deal with audience and different audience readings of Peanuts was that as Peanuts became almost sort of people would say like an institution, like just a national property. There reached a point with these characters where Charles Schultz could sort of author and initiate things, but once they were out in the world, people took them and ran with them in all sorts of different directions, sort of appropriating, repurposing these characters to say things far afield from what Charles Schulz might have ever been saying. And so Snoopy, for example, Snoopy is the flying ace, becomes a powerful symbol for young soldiers during the Vietnam War. I found him in anti-war protest situations. I have,
there was even that
another
novelty
great
single,
example,
right? The Royal Guardsman, Snoopy versus the Red Baron, right?
yes,
It was a like
yeah,
top 10 novelty hit,
yes,
Yeah.
which Schultz's attorney actually sued them over. They ended up working it out,
Really?
settling it
Yeah.
out of court. Yes,
Huh.
yes.
Wow.
And then there were more. They did the Christmas song after that
Right.
with yeah. Initially there was some heat over that. But it's exactly that point that because of the different, it could be as simple as me sort of redrawing a character or making a facsimile, kind of. I can put these on flyers, and if I'm small enough, Schultz will never know that that I used his characters. I think another great example is the relationship between Peppermint Patty and Marcy.
Yeah.
That is one that Schultz always played with some ambiguity. And there's Peppermint Patty is one of my favorite characters because
Yeah.
of just how deep and complex she is. She's so
Yeah.
confident and courageous in some ways, and then other ways she's so just really struggles with, can I be my real self around everyone? And that is, I found in the 70s and 80s and 90s and all on to the present, that Peppermint Patty and Marcy have become very powerful symbols within the lesbian community.
Yeah.
And that so much so that now when you see them, appear in The Simpsons or Family Guy or, SNL, they are just sort of assumed to
Yeah,
be
we
a lesbian
understand that.
couple.
But I mean, Alison Bechdel wasn't writing cartoons in 1960, right?
Right,
So
right, right.
you
Yeah,
will find your heroes and the characters who you can identify with or project some of your experiences on, perhaps where you find them, and so it's interesting
yeah,
that he wrote them with enough ambiguity, let's say, to make them available for that interpretation. But yeah.
This has been such a great conversation, everyone. I just want to introduce myself to the audience. I'm Erin Cox from Oxford University Press, and we've been listening to Phil and Blake talk about such great, fascinating topics, and we have a million questions, so I wanted to jump in, and I hope that's okay.
Please.
I hope you're
sure.
ready for some questions from the
I don't know
audience.
if we have a time for the entire million, but we'll do our best.
Well, we'll get through as many as we can. We'll do a
Yeah,
speed
just
round. Quick one sentence answers. Here we go.
Okay. Lightning round.
Lightning round, exactly. Was the motive of Schultz earning a living or writing to make people better people?
Oh, great question. Well, he certainly made a great living off of it. That's for sure. But I think the thing that most motivated Charles Schultz was cartooning, was telling these stories. I think it meant a lot to him that it connected with people, but I think he seems like the kind of person that would have been doing this even if it was, just back in his, hometown in St. Paul. He was hustling, doing it even then when nobody else was watching. So both and.
Yeah. Well, you just, I sort of jumped in as you guys were talking about Marcy and Peppermint Patty, and that's something you talked a little bit about Franklin and sort of that character, but we'd love to hear more about the sort of strong female characters and about how women growing up with the strip may have seen themselves through some of these characters: Peppermint Patty, Lucy, Sally, Marcy, others in the gang. And was there any sort of particular response? You said, sort of the lesbian community might have grabbed onto these two characters as a sort of a symbol of their representation. Were there other responses or anything sort of from a female perspective?
Yeah, well, I think one of the one of the coolest things from a female perspective about Peanuts is so there's been a lot of talk over the years about the very first Peanuts strip in 1950, where the Shermy says, "Oh, good old Charlie Brown, how I hate him." But there hasn't been as much talk about the second Peanuts comic strip, which is a character named Patty, different from Peppermint Patty, skipping down the sidewalk, and she's saying the classic little nursery rhyme, sugar and spice and everything nice. And then she stops and gives Charlie Brown a right hook to the eye, gives him a black eye, and then she skips along. That's what girls are made of. And from the very get-go, there was this power to and confidence to Charles Schulz's female characters. And it absolutely did resonate with women. Women wrote in all the time the different ways that they were glad to see the girls not be the punchline all the time, right? That they were sort of taking charge, and they could make fools out of the boys, and that sort of power reversal in a very conservative time culturally was absolutely very meaningful to folks. There's another instance where for National Secretaries Week, he did a story about Woodstock being Snoopy's secretary, and the whole week Snoopy is making cracks about how bad a secretary Woodstock is. And Charles Schulz got some heated letters from women across the country saying, "Hey, I work as a secretary. Let me tell you what bosses are like, right? Let me tell you what." And some of them took, because they're really good at these photostat machines, they took the comic strips and they redid them to have Woodstock talking about Snoopy and how terrible a boss he is. And there's some really interesting stuff in there. So yeah, absolutely. Women throughout the history of this comic strip have connected and seen themselves or seen opportunities to push back and demonstrate their own confidence and voice.
Wow. Yeah. Another question. So both Dr. Seuss and Charles Schulz were sort of progressive in a little bit in their writing and things that they're doing. If they're writing today or creating, their comic strips and things today, what do you think? What kind of progressive characters might they create, or stories might they tell?
Oh, well, I mean, yeah, for all of his flaws politically, Seuss was definitely politically engaged and was a liberal Democrat. He wasn't as left as Bernie Sanders, but he was a liberal Democrat, or he became that. I think he didn't start out that way. So I've often thought during the previous guy's regime that he would have had a lot to say, and that I could imagine a book that exposed the very exposable hypocrisy and lies and misanthropy of Mr. Trump. After all, the Butter Battle book was inspired by President Reagan's escalation of the Cold War, and he has an unpublished work that was critical of hypocrisy within the church, and so there is this strong tendency in Seuss to go after hypocrites. It's sort of part of his personality. So when you had someone who is just so prominent and beloved by his cult, I could imagine that being a target for him, and I could imagine him writing a book about it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've gotten this question a few times, and sometimes I get nervous about questions like this, because I'm like, who knows? Sometimes if these folks live long enough, they live long enough to embarrass us, I guess. But
yeah,
I definitely think I would definitely be interested to see what kind of approach Schulz would take, especially in a time when so many of your political figures are even more cartoonish than the cartoons in the newspapers. And But one of the things for sure, Schultz was adamant. He said, when I do politics, I don't do, it's very easy to sort of take a jab at whoever's in power, and then we all laugh, right? But doing politics that is sort of personal, that is lived, that is the social situations that people find themselves in, the dynamics between relationships, that's the kind of politics that he was really interested in.
That's interesting.
And I think
I
think there would have been some really rich material. One area I think about in particular is I would love to see how he might have tried to address our immigration issue. And the ways that these people are being objectified in our political arguments.
Yeah, that's really interesting because I mean he wasn't like Seuss was a political cartoonist. I mean he wrote over 400 of them. Schultz was not. It's not that his work isn't political, but he doesn't quite have that impulse to skewer, to caricature, to puncture that that you need if you want to be a political cartoonist. I just thought of one other example. Seuss rewrote Marvin K. Mooney, Will You Please Go Now, to Richard M. Nixon, Will You Please Go Now, sent it to his friend Art Bookwald, and Art Bookwald published it as his column. And then a week later, Nixon resigned, and so that was a story they like to tell. But that's an example of like taking a book of his and then turning it against, in this case, a president. But anyway, yeah, it's interesting sort of overlap, but also difference. Both cartoonists, both political, but not in quite the same way. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. A question from the audience. Do you think the impact of Schultz introducing an essentially depressed and sometimes even nihilistic child protagonist was significant in its own right? How do you think this affected the way children reading the strip conceived of their world of American ethics even?
Well, it's I spend a good bit of time with this in the book, thinking about what does it mean, and in the press at the time hits on this at times. Here is the United States. They have won World War II. They are a nuclear world power by the mid 50s, and yet here is this national kind of figure who is a perpetual loser, very just very insecure, constantly doubting himself, and in Lucy's words, extremely wishy-washy, right? He can't figure out where he stands, and so in so many ways in the 1950s he represents the opposite of the bravado that we might assume or that we might find in other spaces. And I think in that regard, I think that's part of his success, is that people identified with this feeling, right? That I can get up and I can go to work and I can put on a smile and I can do all the things, but inside I still feel like I haven't figured it out yet, or I still wonder if I'm doing the right thing, or if maybe I'm wrong, or maybe I'm headed down the wrong direction, or is any of it even worth it? And so for a generation that was discovering sort of the discontents of abundance and victory, I think Charlie Brown became this sort of offbeat mascot for that it's okay to be anxious, or to be depressed, or to be you're not alone. And for kids, I have to say, this kind of goes back to there were a lot of times when I would read. I loved Charlie Brown as a kid in the comic strips, because the art was so good. His style, Schultz had produced such great characters visually. But there were a lot of times that I had to go to my grandparents or to my parents and ask, like, hey, could you explain this Peanut strip to me, because I don't get it. you know, it would be, I would get to the end of it and I was like, that seems sad. That's not funny.
But that's what's so wonderful
but
about Peanuts, you know? I mean,
yes,
as a
exactly.
shy kid who was picked last for the team, I totally identified with Charlie Brown. There's this wonderful Sunday strip. I want to say it's from 62, it could be earlier, where the entire strip is him eating alone at lunch. And he's looking at the other kids and he's like making comments like, oh, the PTA did a nice job painting the bench. And it's like, and well, you know, mom gave me, well, I don't really like this sandwich, but she does her best. And it's this sort of wonderfully melancholy strip. And I mean,
yeah.
but children do experience that, and sort of see that in a
Yep.
comic strip is so powerful. I don't know. I think
Yep.
I love the melancholy of Schultz, because it's
Yep.
real. You know, it's totally
Yeah.
real. So,
Yeah.
So, but I don't know. I know some people identify with Lucy or with Snoopy or with Schroeder, but for me, it was definitely Charlie Brown.
Yeah. Well, and the craziest thing about all that is that Charles Schultz would say, people would ask, well, which character are you? They would assume he was Charlie Brown. And there is a lot of Charlie Brown to Charles Schultz, but he would say, really, all of the characters in one way or another have facets of my personality.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's the really interesting thing about this. And you see it in interviews. Charles Schultz can turn on a dime from being the most self-deprecating, unself-assured person to being absolutely confident and absolutely assured that that he knows what's right in cartooning, you know. And so yeah.
What character do you connect with, Blake?
For me, I think it's Linus. You know, Linus is always so Linus is always caught up in high ideas and you know, missing half the time what the kids are talking about, and that was kind of always me as a kid. My friends in college said, you know, you can't spend 5 minutes talking to Blake Ball without it being a serious conversation. So so that's kind of my personality. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's what Christmas is all about, Charlie Brown. Yeah.
That's right.
That's great. Well, a question from the audience is, can you finally tell us, like, settle the age-old debate, who or what was Pigpen meant to signify?
Oh. You know, I've wondered a lot about this, and you know, there's a lot of conversation. Pigpen initially comes out in the early 50s, and there's a lot of conversation in this period of time in national media about this sort of realization that the country in a lot of ways is coming out of the Depression. And it wasn't immediate, and it wasn't as, you know, sort of predetermined as it seemed. Even in the late 40s, there's still a lot of economic struggles. But in the 50s, you know, there's sort of this feeling that we're coming out of this, and then there's this sort of the maybe sort of a new age of muckrakers who are bringing out, you know, the stories of the plight of African Americans, and especially in the segregated South, but then all of these stories of like urban plight, and poverty, and there's a great story in Theodore White's Making of the Presidency, 1960. In 1959, when John Kennedy takes a trip for the first time, he's campaigning in West Virginia, and he sees poverty in Appalachia, and White says that Kennedy actually, you know, sort of finishes up a little, you know, meet and greet sort of thing, and then goes around behind the bus and cries because he just had no idea that there were people in America that live like this. I've always wondered if there is something to that. Now, of course, Pigpen is perhaps the most confident of all the Peanuts characters. He could care less that he offends everyone else. But I've wondered if there's some element of that that concern about the sort of underbelly of American prosperity.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Phil?
Yeah, I think that's possible. About Pigpen, that he, represents those who've been left out and left behind. I'm not sure. I haven't and I'm trying to remember if David Michaelis says anything about Pigpen in his bio, because he does make particular connections to characters. Like he says, Schultz's first wife Joyce is the inspiration for Lucy, and I mean, he makes a lot of interpretive claims, right? That may or may not be true. Like, they're interesting as interpretations. Mm-hmm. They may or may not be right or wrong, but they're interesting. And so I was actually trying to remember that as you were talking, and then I was thinking about what was his name, like Ron McKernan, the Grateful Dead musician whose nickname was Pigpen. I was thinking about him, but of course, the nickname is after the fact for him, so it comes from Pigpen. But why would he be called Pigpen? And so that's kind of where my mind was going. I think you've got a much better answer than I do, which makes sense. You're the Peanuts expert. I'm not. So.
Well, we're coming to the end of our time, so I'll say, do either of you? Maybe I'll pose one last question for your last thoughts. What would you like people to take away from your books? What would you like people to, when now it's Charlie Brown Christmas special time, when people are watching the special, what would you like them to be thinking about, perhaps? Or, if they're reading Dr. Seuss, what would you like them to be thinking about?
Well, I mean, I guess children's culture and popular culture is more complex than I think many people realize. And there's a lot there for your investigation, for your criticism, and for your affection. And that I think if you're willing to take it seriously, you will find and you will benefit from. For example, it's Christmas, so the Grinch will be the Seuss culture that people experience the most this time, whether it's the original animated version, the book that precedes that, one of the 2 live action films, and there's another one now in production. But so, the Grinch is famously an anti-consumerist parable. Maybe Christmas doesn't come from a store. Maybe it means a little bit more. Seuss was also an advertiser. He before he was a children's book writer, he made his career in advertising. Like, that was his gig. So make sense of that.
Yeah.
Over to you, Blake.
I think that's a great point. I think sort of along those same lines, I think we have a real tendency to look at the things that become popular in my goodness, the sort of trend waves today in the age of the internet and social media it's so fast that you can be bypassed by like 6 different trends in a week and not even realize you missed it. Until you're wondering, what is this whole room of people talking and laughing about? I have no idea what they're referring to. But we have this tendency to take things that are popular and go, because it's popular, it must be mindless and it must be worthless. But in the same way, I think that by taking some of these things seriously and digging seriously into them, we actually find that these are some extremely revealing spaces, because we're assuming that it's just entertainment and it's just for fun and and things like that. We are willing to sort of let our guard down and admit some of our assumptions that if we were really pressed analytically on them, we might go, oh, I'm going to, kind of cover over that or shine that up a little bit. I find it to be a surprisingly honest space. And so there's a lot there if we treat it seriously.
Thank you.
Well,
thank you both. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Blake, for such a fascinating conversation. And thank you to the audience for watching. And I just want to highlight our next OUP History Book Club will be January 14th at 1 p.m. to talk about Divisions, a new history of racism and resistance in America's World War II military, with author Thomas Guglielmo and Adrian Lentz-Smith. So everybody tune back in, but you can rewatch this if you missed any of it. You can rewatch it here at CrowdCast or on Facebook, wherever you're watching it. So thanks again, Phil and Blake. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.